Good morning. This is Steve Porcaro. Welcome to our live Coaches Corner. And this morning, we're going to be talking about some presentation tips to help you while you're out there selling, leading, or transitioning. And then we'll take a few minutes to talk about some transition tips, presentation tips during the call. But we also have a couple questions that were submitted via email, and we're going to take your call as well, at least some of the questions you have with our time allotted going forward. So I'd like to welcome you. I know some of you are driving, some people are working, and I want to be able to respect your time and start and stop promptly. So to jump right in, I just want to talk about housekeeping. If for some reason you have to jump off the call, not a problem. We're recording this. I'll send you a link to the recording probably within 24 hours or so you can go back and listen. If you weren't able to make the call live, I'm glad you're listening via the recording. We'll be able to hopefully share some information with you. Also, there's a chat button on your menu. You can submit your questions there. Also, if you look on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little toolbar. If you hit the More button, you should be able to raise your hand with a question as we go through this. This is a live video call. You're able to turn your video on if you'd like to. That'd be great to when we're doing our Q&A. Feel free to jump in. Would like you to interact and really have more of an engagement than sitting here and allowing Barry and I to sit here and talk. What we're going to do is really just jump right in. We'll do a quick introduction for those of you who I don't know through the group. My name's Steve Porcaro. I manage a number of groups on LinkedIn, and based on the feedback, we've been running these groups, Barry and I, for about 10 years. We've been answering some of these questions piecemeal, either through the groups or one-on-one discussions, and we thought it would be helpful to share this information live and to answer your questions. Barry is our group manager in a number of those groups. She's having a technical issue at the moment, and she'll be joining us when she gets her camera back online. Nope, there she is. So Barry's our group manager. She's gonna help run the meeting as well as answer some of the questions as we go forward. And I think that's it in terms of housekeeping. Also, as a reminder, next week on the 22nd of October, our topic will be transitioning. And I know that comes up quite a lot for people on LinkedIn, but we'll be devoting most of that time to transitioning tips and answering questions about that as well. Without further ado, let's jump right in. We got a good question we want to leave with, but I think, Barry, anything you want to add? I just did a quick housekeeping about raising hands. Barry will help us if you have an answer, either coming through the chat or raising your hand. Also via email. We'll be getting those emails as well. Our goal here, and this has been asked from some of the people in the group, our goal is to go live with this call, hopefully in the next few weeks. We're going to try to do this live to see if we can get some feedback and answer your questions on the fly. I know timing is always a challenge for everybody, so we'll take it from that there. Barry, anything you want to add before we jump into our Q&A and our topic?
Yeah, just quickly regarding the chat function, when you do want to ask a question, you have the option of asking the question publicly to everyone or to Steve or myself. So if you want to ask it privately, that's okay.
All right, thank you, Barry. All right, so let's jump right in. And our topic, even though we do have a topic, we'd like to start off with that, but we have a question from last week from Rich, and he brings up a good question. When going into an initial meeting with a doctor with a new company, you may or may not know the doctor previously, but the doctor accepts your meeting request and you go in there to show him your information and show him your product. The doctor doesn't have a lot of information what you're doing, but he knows it's about injections or some other product or service sold in the hospital. The question really goes back to, I think if we were to summarize this question, because it goes on, what's the biggest challenge getting in front of people uh, and getting information from the doctor? I mean, one of the things that we do as sales professionals, and whether you're in a small business, independent rep, or you're working with a team, is that you want to do your research. But if you have a new product, you're calling on a new physician, sometimes it's hard to get information out there. And the gist of this question is that many of the physicians have been very guarded over the last few years when it comes to sharing information. Either they've opened themselves up, or more importantly, they shared so much information that it came back to bite them. So one of the things we wanted to throw out there is, based on that scenario, what have others run into? What has worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? Bari actually had come from the ophthalmology industry, where she had worked with a number of practices, and she wanted to share some tips that she used, I think, because it's really all about information, right? Doing your research and putting together a reasonable presentation. So Bari, do you mind leading us off and jump starting that?
Sure. Um, the, the lesson that I learned very quickly was that sometimes the doctor is not who you need to get in front of. In a lot of practices, the administrator is not only the gatekeeper, but the decision maker as well. So by consistently getting to know the personality or the DNA of each practice, for me, an important step was figuring out who the decision maker was, because in a lot of situations, the administrator became my best friend. That was the person I really needed to get the approval from in order to find the information that I needed. Sometimes the doctor wasn't forthcoming, but the administrator kind of gave me the information on the sly or gave me a heads up. So even though the practice is your ultimate customer, within that practice, there may be someone else who might be your ally. So that's what I always do, is I try to find out sort of what the MO of each practice is, because every practice is different.
Thank you, Bari. So going back to Rich had this question that he submitted via email. I think it's really interesting. Is it talking about our approach being different or the environment being different? You know, he mentions paranoia from physicians these days. And on one hand, I don't blame them. If you look back historically, you know, if you were a sales professional coming in with a new and improved technology or service, you were looked upon as an outsider, just a mere vendor. Over the years, I've worked for organizations where we positioned ourselves as consultants. We became partners with the physician, and as the pendulum has swung within the healthcare industry and market, it's very interesting to see how things have been changing. So one of the things that we have to focus on is, why are things shifting in the healthcare environment, and why are things moving back to where the doctors are afraid to share information? On one hand, they're looking for the revenue, the income. On the other hand, I think they're afraid to share some of the information. On one hand, there's so much with confidentiality issues. There's so much HIPAA. And again, if you've been out there for a while, pre-HIPAA, it went from one end of the spectrum to anybody and everybody was allowed in the hospital or in the physician's office. When my wife was giving birth, we joked about every resident that was on the floor, the janitor, every nursing assistant, and she's sitting there with her legs up. And then on the other hand, it got to the point where, uh, as a consultant or a sales professional in the operating room, we couldn't even go into the room until the patient was draped and securely prepared for surgery. So again, the pendulum has swung. So I think, to Rich's question, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. Doing your homework, getting champions, planting the seeds. How many times do we have to touch people? Rich brought up a good point. These are services that the physicians are asking for. When you go in there with a solution for them, are they ready to commit and pull the trigger? There are so many factors. One of the things that's very interesting, the cost of keeping an office open. And again, Barry had spent many years working with practices and trying to help them market their services. And some of the challenges that they're running into, their cash flow may or may not be there, their reimbursement, the overhead, the things that we were vaguely aware of. I think it's depending on what state, and again, there's so many factors to consider. Uh, as much as they want it, the return on investment may be limited. So I think part of this is, as Barry mentioned earlier, trying to develop that relationship. And the bigger question is, I would ask, what would it take for us to go forward with this? What's holding you back to figure out how to help them get over that comfort level? Because a lot of times, and again, my experiences in the office setting are limited, but I did sell some products. Um, as much as they like the lure of easy money, the reimbursement, logistically, when we sold, and I sold DME products into the office, everybody wanted the exciting return on investment. What they didn't want was the inventory hassles, one of their staff people taking care of it, the reimbursement issues. Even if you said, don't worry, it's magic, it will happen behind the scene, they were very skeptical. I mean, there was no quick fix on that. So, Barry, looks like you have something you want to share.
Sorry about that, I was muted. One thing I wanted to point out was Steve brought up a great point. He said, you need to ask the practice, what would it take for us to move forward? Sometimes that in itself won't get an answer because it's too direct of a question. And it also depends who you're asking that question to. Again, if the practice administrator or the practice manager or even the clinic supervisor is the champion in that practice, they might be the right person to question, but not that question directly. Sometimes it takes consultative questioning to pull it out of them. You can't just say, hey, what's your problem? Because they're not going to give you a straight answer.
Right. And Barry, you bring up a good point. The interesting part is this is where we put our Columbo hat on. And I learned this approach in the hospital. I always came from the bottom up, right? Where's the path of least resistance? So what I would do is do my work at the lowest level, the lowest level, because the barrier to entry to me was easy. So I would go to central service, central sterile supply, the people who were receiving the instrumentation, the people who were pulling the cases. They knew what the surgeons were pulling. They knew what their preferences were. They also knew the people in the OR. So I would work my way from the bottom up and then from the top down and meet in the middle. And it's interesting when you hear all that information. And again, that's not a quick fix. It's a little bit more of a strategic approach over time. But if you were planning on getting your foot in the door and it was worthwhile, you may have to have many touch points. And again, this is a multifaceted approach. But at the end of the day, by the time I worked my way up to the surgeon, and this is really an orthopedic surgeon, I knew who was processing his equipment. I knew what his orthopedic nurse. I got in touch with the people in his office, the x-ray person. So I was able to get a 360 almost before I got to that physician. if it's possible, I mean, that's a great way to approach it. It's not possible all the time, but allowed me to prepare because I knew why he was using what he was using and why he wasn't using the competitor, especially if some company made a promise 5 years ago and they dropped the ball and he's using this company. It was a trust issue. It may have nothing to do with technology. It may be a personnel issue or relationship issue. So when you go back there and lay everything out, it may have nothing to do with us as much as it may have to do with all these other players. And again, getting into the office, it's such a complicated issue today. I don't know if there is a one quick fix or that magic wand. So we have a couple people, Rich. I know you're on the call. If you can chime in, I'd love to hear a little bit more if you're available to do that. If you're able to chat, I'd love to get a little bit more information and share your experience with the group.
And Rich, you don't have to go on video. You can just unmute yourself and use the voice function. So don't feel like if you're, somewhere where you can't be on camera, that's okay. But we
Yeah, I
would
don't
like.
think he has his video on. Not everyone has video capability. So that's okay. Barry's the best looking person on this call by far. I don't know, you guys could be good looking, but I think Barry's the best looking person on the call by far.
I'll pay you later, Steve. I'll pay you later.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a good question, but I think physicians' offices have changed over the years. I mean, one of the things that's very interesting, and if you've been out in the field for a little while, and I only go back to 1988 when I was out in the field, but we were getting into the office and they were able to do a lot of things independently, and they were able to invest in equipment. I was selling a test kit for neurological, for carpal tunnel, again, cold therapy, pain pumps. I go back to all this great stuff, and it's not even out there anymore because of some of the regulations that the insurance companies put in. Compounding medication. There's some great products out there, but again, once it got on the radar, it was really hard for people to move that forward. So I think part of it is we're trying to stay one step ahead of I don't want to say the law, but the healthcare regulators, the FDA, the insurance companies, and the need from the physician is here, and we're always trying. It's always just out of reach sometimes. It's a moving target. Again, Barry, ophthalmology is a perfect example. When she was out in the field, this was a cash product you were selling, right? So what was the biggest challenge, Barry, for getting people, your practice managers or the physicians, even after they bought the equipment, why weren't they using it?
In a lot of cases, it meant determining how to fit the diagnostic equipment or the treatment into the clinic flow. And they were so set in how they did things that they were reluctant to change and take a chance on incorporating that into their flow, because chair time is a big factor in how many patients you can see and how much revenue you can bring in. So until we could show them an ROI and show them that there was a return on investment, just as far as educating patients or getting that additional diagnostic information, we were dead in the water. So we had to show them the value of taking the extra time to do that. And in some cases, that meant assigning a dedicated person and making that person the champion of that modality in their practice. Sometimes it didn't make sense to train everybody on it. A lot of the practices chose to educate their staff on educating the patient, but only one person in charge of actually dealing one-on-one with the patient.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And, our topic is presentation skills, or as I like to say, presenting with confidence. And the first tip and the first takeaway is really know your audience. What do they care about? And you can have the best product and service in the world, but if you don't know what your audience wants, i.e., whether it's the practice manager, the practice the principal, you may have one person who's in charge of the practice at the moment, or the individual physician. What do they care about? You're not really sure how to emphasize or de-emphasize a certain product. And you may go in there, and we've talked about this, I think, on and off over the years, regardless of where you are, whether you're leading your team, growing your business, or transitioning. What is the main takeaways you're trying to get across? I know from a healthcare perspective, we may talk about clinical outcomes, efficacies, cost containment, all these other factors, but here's the interesting part. We don't know what we don't know about that physician's office. We don't know if he's been through 5 practice managers in the last 18 months. We don't know if it's hard getting staff. We don't know if he's a good manager or he's running into other issues, HR issues. So even though you can bring in revenue for him, he doesn't have the capabilities to handle it. Maybe he's getting ready to retire or bring on a partner. So it's interesting, without knowing what are all the factors involved, it's really hard to put your presentation together. So again, number one, from a presentation standpoint, know the audience. What are the main takeaways? Again, saving time, increasing revenue, convenience, those are big factors, but we don't know what they're trying to overcome. So ideally, as a Boy Scout and a Boy Scout leader, I have 3 boys in scouting, we talk about being prepared. In a surgical outcome, we always had a plan A, B, and C, and then sometimes a D, E, and F. Even in the office setting, and you're going in there with your tools and your presentation, I think going in there single-mindedly making a presentation, thinking we know all the facts, sometimes that first presentation is a fact-finding mission. So you want to go in there, and it could be a process, but it's an interesting thing to focus on. All right, Barry's chomping at the bit. Take it away, Barry.
Yeah, Steve brought up a great point, and that is, in that first meeting, now, in some cases, you may already have a relationship with the practice. So that is forewarned is forearmed. But in many cases, that first meeting, you have to figure out the right questions to ask to uncover the pain points, because that is what's going to give you the information you need to effectively create your presentation. If the doctor is only concerned about benefits and you spend an hour talking about features, you're talking to deaf ears. So sometimes your first presentation isn't a presentation at all. Fact-finding mission is a great expression, because those consultative questions to uncover those hidden pain points is the only way you're going to get that information. Most doctors are not forthcoming.
Yeah, no, and again, I think it boils down to relationships. Where are you in that relationship? How far can you press that and get that information? But again, I want to step back a little bit because of time. We have a few people on the call. I want to be able to address questions. Again, we've been talking about some presentation tips. And again, I can talk about presentation skills and tips forever. It's near and dear to my heart. I'm a student of communication. I'm pretty bad now, but I was a lot worse many years ago. So someday I hope to be good, but the more I do it, the better I get. So what I'd like to do is, what type of questions do you have? Either presentation skills, questioning, they're all connected, or anything related. Again, this is your time. Barry and I are here to help you in any way we can. So if you're on mute, you can unmute yourself. If not, I get a few more things I can share with you. But again, if you have a question, throw it out. So again, presenting with confidence. These are some great takeaways. So number one, know your audience. Number two, what are the main takeaways that you're trying to get across. Number 3, being prepared. And again, near and dear to my heart. Number 4, do a room check or a setup check. I present on a regular basis. Sometimes I'll go to organizations that I've never been to. I'll try to get there early, get a lay of the land, figure out the best place to stand, figure out the best place if I'm using a PowerPoint, a computer, or a projector, whether I'm using a flip chart. What are the best logistics? Do I want to meet and greet people when they come in, introduce myself? So I'll do everything I can to do that. And again, this is no different if you're going to make a sales call or if you're planning to go in and meet somebody for an interview process. Audio visual, it's so funny. We use technology all the time now, but it's not infallible. One of the first presentations I used on PowerPoint years ago, the organization said, oh yeah, we're all set. We have a projector. We're good to go. Well, guess what? I got there, I set up my computer, their projector wasn't good to go. So I had a great presentation, I thought, and for a moment, I didn't know if I was going to be able to pull it off. Luckily, I had handouts, so I used the handout, and it was actually one of the best presentations I've done, and I laugh about it because I was depending on the PowerPoint to give the presentation, which really was an interesting takeaway. The other thing that's very interesting, eye contact. I've been part of many presentations where people are up on a podium, they may be reading their PowerPoint slide, but what happens is looking people in the eyes, very important. And I know it's hard for some people, especially if you're focused on your presentation, the dynamics, you have a lot of information. But I think taking a few minutes to look in there, eyes is important. So take the time to look people in the face, because again, we're sharing information, but it's really right in, eyes to their soul. And then the other thing, just before we wrap it up, if you're up there, you need to own the stage. Whether you're in front of a small group of people, a large group of people, own the stage, take ownership. Project confidence, have a presence there, smile, be warm, be open. I think part of the challenge is we're so used to presenting sometimes one-on-one that if we have to present to a room, it may be a little bit challenging. There are some people we have to get a hook to pull them back off the stage. Once they get going, I'm not looking at you, Barry, but there are some people who don't want to be the center of attention. So it's little things. Your body language says a lot when we're presenting. Again, whether we're interviewing, trying to get new business, or leading our team, presenting ideas, it's all about how you come across. And then the last one, keeping track of time. I think it's important, especially if you're in an area where you're presenting and they say, all right, Steve, you got 5 minutes. Or more importantly, I used to love this. I would plan a meeting with a physician. I would schedule an appointment, and the office would say, you get 15, 20 minutes. I'd get there. He's running late because of patients, because of the OR. You have 5 minutes. I'm like, okay. The best one is when I would go to the hospital to see him, and he'd be scrubbing his hands before surgery and say, all right, Steve, I got 2 minutes while I scrub my hands. What do you got? So being aware of the time is very important to make sure that you're getting the information across. And at that point, when I had 2 minutes, the best thing I did was, hey, doctor, let's reschedule this because I have a lot of information. You've been asking for it. There's really no way. Well, all I did was close for the next presentation. So because of our time, I want to open this up to any final questions. I want people to have fun on the call. And I want this to be something that is going to be interesting for people going forward. So, any last questions before we wrap it up for today? And I'm looking, we're looking at the monitor. We get questions coming in via chat groups, message groups. A couple people had to jump off. They're letting us know that they'll be here again next week. All right, so as a reminder, we'll be here next Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Our topic will be transitioning. Whether you're trying to break in, whether you're trying to pick up a new product line, if you're independent, or if you're looking for a new opportunity, Barry and I, unfortunately, have a lot of experience with that over the last 10 years, especially with people in the group. So we'll be more than happy to share everything we can. Barry, anything you want to say before we wrap it up?
One thing regarding presentation skills and confidence is sometimes when we get nervous, we apologize if something goes wrong. But a lot of people in the audience wouldn't have known anything had gone wrong if you hadn't apologized. So just stay confident and, fake it till you make it.
All right. And on that note, have a great week, everyone. And we'll see you next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Bye-bye.